right, members of the House Judiciary Committee on Tuesday pushed executives from Google, Facebook, and Twitter about their history of political bias on their platforms. And with us now is one of those members of Congress, Congressman Mike Johnson. He serves the 4th Congressional District of Louisiana and also serves on the House Judiciary Committee. Before heading to Capitol Hill, he was a constitutional law attorney and litigated free speech cases for nearly 20 years. Mike, welcome back to Washington Watch.
Hey, Tony. It's always a pleasure.
I watched clips of yesterday's hearing as, our friends like Louis Gohmert and others, pressed in for some answers on what they were focusing on. And you were focusing on how they determine what's inappropriate speech, the fake news, all that stuff. Here's a clip. I want to play this clip. This is your exchange with him yesterday, and I want to get you to fill us in on the results.
A controversy developed this year with regard to you guys about the Southern Poverty Law Center, the SPLC, and they labeled some mainstream Christian and conservative organizations as hate groups because they didn't like what they were doing. And then Google and YouTube used the SPLC designation, at least allegedly, to flag the content of those groups. I mean, did that happen? Do you admit that that happened?
So that reference is to a program that we call the Trusted Flagger Program, which is one where we engage NGOs and government agencies with expertise on the particular kinds of things we prohibit per policy. They get access to a bulk flagging tool so they can flag videos to us in bulk rather than one at a time. They do not have any authority to remove content, restrict content, or demote content on our services. All of those decisions are made by us. So we're leveraging their expertise, but decision-making authority is retained by the company.
I guess this goes to the appeals process, but I mean, some of these groups I know personally are legitimate, well-respected, faith-based organizations, and I just want to say SPLC is not a neutral watchdog organization, so I'm glad to know they don't get editorial control, but I think some of that needs to be looked at.
Congressman Johnson, I mean, full disclosure here, I don't like the Southern Poverty Law Center. I think they are a biased leftist organization. And why in the world would any of these organizations use them in their Trusted Flagger program? I wouldn't trust them with anything.
No, and it is of great concern, not only to you and to me, but to, I would say, all the Republican members on the Judiciary Committee. And this is not the end of this issue, Tony. It's the beginning. I mean, the voice you heard there, the female voice, that's Miss Juniper Downs, and she's the global head of public policy and government relations for Google and YouTube. I mean, they are a social media giant. They were there with Facebook as well as Twitter executives, and they really didn't give us any satisfactory answers to these questions at all, Tony. I mean, none of them could define or were willing to try to define what is or is not fake news. They were very, ambiguous about that. They tried to dodge the questions because obviously that's a very difficult thing to do, and yet they're exercising that kind of editorial control every single day on social media. And this is our greatest concern, how they farm out effectively, as she says in her words, leverage the expertise of these outside groups. You're using a group like the Southern Poverty Law Center. I mean, they're known to be, they're not a neutral watchdog organization. They're a radical leftist organization that's out to get Christian conservative groups. I mean, that's widely understood now. So it's a real problem, and it's a growing problem, and we've got to fix this.
I mean, look, what I was watching, and I watched Louis trying to pin them down on what countries may have tried to use their platforms, like Russia. I mean, look, to me, those folks it looked like a greased pig at a Sunday school picnic. I mean, he could not pin them down. They are experts at evading the questions.
Well, they are, and this is the inherent problem with a congressional hearing. On the Judiciary Committee, for example, it's a large committee, as everyone knows, and it's divided down partisan lines. We have a slim majority as Republicans, but when you have a hearing like that, everyone is only allowed 5 minutes of questioning. Now, I'm a lawyer. I've done a lot of depositions under oath over the years. I've questioned witnesses on the stand in court. In 5 minutes, you really don't have time to get to the depth of anything. And witnesses who are well prepared by their lawyers and handlers, they know that you can pretty well dodge, parry, and spin for 5 minutes and get out of it, and then the next guy takes over on a totally different line of questions. So it's very difficult to get the real answers.
I mean, they can hold their breath for 5 minutes, some of them. I do think, and we've actually discussed this, that greater coordination, and so that they can't evade those questions, is that if I think the members would do follow-up, and just instead of each focusing on their own area of interest, just nail them on some of these issues, because like this is a serious problem that affects conservatives across the board, whether you're in Congress, whether you're on the outside, no matter what you do. Content restriction. I mean, you're talking about YouTube. You got Prager University that has been targeted by their content targeted by YouTube. Was there any discussion yesterday about PragerU in that case?
I think it was referenced in a couple of the questions. The hearing went on for quite some time, and a couple of us had to dodge in and out for other meetings while it was going on, which is another part of the problem, is the schedule in Congress on these hearing days. But I mean, we're in uncharted waters in many ways. I mean, the internet, as we all know, is kind of like the Wild West, and there aren't any satisfactory answers yet on how you do this. I mean, we know, for example, that because these are private companies. I mean, Twitter and Facebook and YouTube and Google, they're all private companies, so these are not government actors.
Right.
So we don't have the trigger for constitutional protection. So there's no federal court yet that's extended First Amendment protections to cover any user activity on these social media platforms. So we're delving into that now, and on the Judiciary Committee, this is within our jurisdiction to try to figure this out, to try to navigate these uncharted waters and figure out how and when and what to do to make sure that these abuses are not allowed to happen in the future.
I mean, I've had some conversations with some of these executives who are doing, repair work. I mean, clearly they've got a problem with conservatives, and so they're going around trying to repair the damage. But they have avoided using these words now because they know what they mean. Earlier, they have used them in times past, and in essence, it's what they are. They're really the new virtual public square, and they're becoming gatekeepers as to who can come in and who cannot come in. And so that I know they're private companies. I get that, not looking for more government regulation, but if they're holding themselves out to be a place where public dialogue and discussion is to take place, it's got to be fair.
Well, that's right. And we do want to jealously guard and protect the free marketplace of ideas. As conservatives, that's part of our philosophy. We want to do that. But what you have, in effect, and it's well known now, and it's becoming rather infamous, is that you have the guardians, the gatekeepers, as you say. They are clearly censoring the free speech of law-abiding citizens with whom they disagree, and that is detrimental to our democratic principles, to the idea of open and civil discourse and debate, which is essential to who we are as Americans and who we are in a constitutional republic. So. Again, uncharted waters. These are new and developing issues with all this new technology, but it's not a can that we can kick down the road very far, because there's serious consequences to this kind of thing, and we got to get to the bottom of it.
Before our time expires here, and I limit the content that you can put on the program here by the break. Let me ask you this. Let me go back to your line of questioning about the Southern Poverty Law Center and how these entities are using them to essentially, well, as they said in their trusted flagger program. I mean, this is like the fox guarding the hen house from the inside. What did you learn anything new, and then what are the next steps here?
Well, as I said, these spokespersons for these social media giants were pretty evasive in my view. They were not able or perhaps not willing to answer some of the key questions that we had for them. How do they farm out these discretionary decisions? They use these flaggers, they said, to delete questionable video content. They claim that their own organizations have the final say and whether to censor or silence a viewpoint. But the standards that they use, even inside their companies, are very subjective. I mean, obviously, you've got a handful of people or maybe a low-level employee getting to decide unilaterally whether they think someone's speech is quote-unquote fake news or not, or whether they think it's offensive or hateful or all these other subjective terms they use. I mean, that's a real problem. And if you had a government actor, that would never be allowed. It would never be tolerated, because the government can't pick and choose which viewpoints it wants to allow in the public square. But here we have a virtual public square that's being policed, and the gatekeepers have, in my view, far too much power. So we're trying to figure out the contours of this. I don't think that hearing was, at the end of the day, very helpful, because they really just basically said, we're making the rules up as you go along. I mean, that's, in layman's terms, that's what we got out of that hearing. And I don't think that's a satisfactory answer for the American people.
Let me ask you, Mike, you've been there a couple of years now on these hearings. There's a lot of them. Do you find these hearings, because as you said, you get 5 minutes, each member of the big committees, everybody gets 5 minutes. Do you find these hearings very helpful for you as a congressman to get the information that you need, or are there better sources for you to get the information?
It's a useful tool. It can be if it's used the right way. I mean, I'm one of these. I was a lawyer and I've done depositions in my career, so I take it pretty seriously.
And I know you're a lawyer. We're praying for you. We're praying for you. Okay.
I'm a recovering lawyer, as you used to say, a recovering politician. But we do a lot of preparation. We read all the materials and prepare lots of questions in advance, and I'm there with a very clear objective. I'm trying to get answers to very specific questions. I don't know that that's always true for every committee member, and some of them use it as an opportunity to grandstand for cameras, and I think that's unfortunate. I think some of these hearings could be more productive if, as you say, there was more coordination among the members, and that more time was spent in preparing a series of questions. Since we each have 5 minutes, we should tag team more often. I think we're going to have more of that as this develops and goes forward, because people are recognizing that, especially this year, there's been so many of these high-profile grandstanding kind of hearings, and just really not a lot of productive work comes out of it. Congress has subpoena authority, of course. Duly authorized subpoenas can be issued by the Congress, and information can be gathered. But as we've seen in recent months, even with the Department of Justice,